pause on the minister's law before he pulls the comments down offline. The Globe and Mail called the minister's performance amateur hour on C10. Open media has said the Prime Minister...
Well, the House of Commons with 3 weeks left is getting heated. First, we have Jazraz, the finance critic for the Conservatives, and he's got some zingy words for MP Freeland. Check it out.
Just months after that, she admitted she'll run deficits forever and balance a budget in the year never. 8 years of massive liberal...
From the illegal.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
The Finance Minister said that she would end her inflationary deficits and balance the budget by 2027. Just months after that, she admitted she'll run deficits forever and balance a budget in the year never. 8 years of massive Liberal deficits gave Canadians the highest bank interest rate hikes not seen in the last 20 years, and now the International Monetary Fund is reporting Canada is highest at risk for mortgage default crisis. When will the Finance Minister end her inflationary spending and give us a date of when she'll balance the budget so Canadians don't lose their homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative finance critic is a serious adult. That's why it's been frankly so embarrassing to watch juvenile staffers from the Conservative leader's office bully him and other Conservative members of the Finance Committee and force them to play juvenile partisan games and filibuster legislation that will provide Canadians with support they need right now. It was embarrassing to watch, Mr. Speaker, and it shows how irresponsible these Conservatives are.
Well, Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
What's embarrassing is while Canadians are suffering, that Finance Minister dumped a $60 billion jerry can of fuel on the inflationary fire that she started.
And then in the House of Commons, MP Chong had some really good points. And here, you know what? I'll just let him do the speaking. Check this out.
The Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 31 weeks, more than 7 months, since the news that the government knew about the PRC's interference in our democracy came to light. Since then, we've asked hundreds of questions in this House and in its committees, but we've gotten very few answers. The only thing we've gotten are a few answers here and there, heavily redacted documents, and a mountain of process, NSICOP and CIRA, a special rapporteur. Will the Prime Minister commit to a public inquiry with the full powers of a public inquiry so we can get answers to exactly what happened?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the colleague across the way highlights the mechanisms that shine a light on how it is we're protecting our democratic institutions from foreign interference, including through the creation of NSICOP, a multi-partisan endeavour, including through the creation of NSIRA. And yes, Mr. Johnston, who is now determined that he will not be carrying on, has charted out a course. What's important is that we work together, Mr. Speaker, by addressing the concerns that have been raised with regards to foreign interference, but doing so in a way that is responsible to protect our national security. That remains the commitment of this government, and we look forward to taking the next concrete steps with all members in this chamber.
The Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, on a related national security matter concerning the Winnipeg lab breaches, it was 2.5 years ago that this House of Commons ordered the production of documents. The government refused to comply with the order, then they hid behind NSICOP, and now finally, 2.5 years later, the committee that is looking at these documents has just been stood up. Mr. Speaker, we can't wait 2.5 years for more process to unfold to get the answers we need about interference in our democracy that affects all members and all parties of this House. So, will the government commit today to a public inquiry so this democracy and Canadians across the country can get the answers they deserve about PRC interference?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, when Justice Iacobucci and Justice O'Connor made the recommendations about critical changes that needed to happen to make sure that parliamentarians could see into every corner of government, the Leader of the Opposition, as Minister at the time, ignored that request. In fact, if the Leader of the Opposition had his way, there would be no way to look at any national security documents. What we did in Winnipeg Labs, Mr. Speaker, is offer all of the documents to be seen at NSICOP. When they refused, we created an alternate process with a panel of independent arbiters that can look at every redaction to make sure they're legitimate. It took them nearly a year to agree to that process. They finally have. They took a long time to appoint their members. I'm glad they finally have.
The Honourable l'honorable député de Mégantic.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Why hasn't the Prime Minister already announced a public and independent inquiry into Beijing's interference? The Prime Minister has tried to cover up the help he received from the Beijing regime in the 2019 and 2021 elections. The cover-up was inventing the position of Special Rapporteur and entrusting the mandate to his friend, a member of the Trudeau Foundation. David Johnston resigned on Friday after being unable to prove beyond doubt that the appearance of a conflict of interest between him and the Prime Minister was unfounded. Will the Prime Minister launch an independent inquiry today and finally work with the opposition to ensure that Canadians can find out the whole truth? The Honourable Public Safety Minister. Mr. Speaker, the government is always ready to work with the opposition parties, including the Conservatives. However, the Conservatives continuously refuse to receive a briefing from the intelligence services. So I hope that today is an opportunity for us to truly work together with the opposition, because this matter is incredibly important. It is essential that we look into and address the threats posed by foreign interference, and we must do this work together. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. So why, though, rather than making a decision immediately after David Johnston's resignation, as he could have done, why did he not immediately announce a public independent inquiry? Instead of doing that, he sent his friend to do a media campaign.
Now, in the shocking or not so shocking news, Erin O'Toole, his last speech was today. He's saying he's calling it quits, and he said that's it. He's packing. The foreign interference may just been, enough for him. Here's Pierre on.
It's in our heart as being deeply cruel and mean, and to have his family subjected to that as well, Mr. Speaker, is something incredibly difficult. But he stood and fought for what he believed in, and we have a democracy that we can thank for that. And perhaps that's something that we can be called to in this moment when we talk about the former Prime Minister Borden's call to a greater purpose. That greater purpose is our democracy. It is the respect that we show for one another, that as we have debates and differences, we recognize that those differences are so small compared to the love we have for this country, the love we have for serving our community. Because in our words and in our differences of policy, the member for Durham and I had very vigorous debates and disagreements. But in one another's eyes, we see a love for our community, a love for our country, and a desire to serve. Through you, Mr. Speaker, to the member of Durham, thank you for your service to this place and to our country. I wish you every success in the days ahead.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
I rise today in praise of a life of service to Canada. The member for Durham is a Canadian first and a Canadian servant above all. He started his adult life at military college, went through law school, had a successful career in law, but then instead of turning that success into simply to personal riches for himself, turned it into generosity towards others. He became known for his commitment to philanthropy and volunteer work, sitting on the board of True Patriot Love, where he raised countless dollars to help wounded veterans. This was something already close to his heart because, of course, he himself had served in the armed forces. And it was in the forces that he learned about loyalty, discipline, planning, strategy, all qualities that he would put to successful use in his service towards others. He would go on to follow in his father's footsteps, his father John, having been a very respected member of provincial parliament, acting as a great mentor to his son. And the member for Durham would present himself in a by-election, and I think we can all agree he was someone who was elected locally, not on a party brand, but on his personal notoriety around the community. Places, streets, community halls, coffee shops where he had frequented since childhood, came out in droves to elect him to be their servant in this place. And after being elected, he would make great sacrifices, for which I not only thank him, but also want to thank his wife, Rebecca, and his daughter, Molly, and son, Jack, who had to spend weekends and often evenings without him as he was traveling on the road. He was very quickly elevated to Minister of the Crown. In fact, he was in cabinet with lightning speed as then Prime Minister Harper recognized his ability, his knowledge, and his prior experience, making him Minister of Veterans Affairs. Now, this was a difficult time in that portfolio because, of course, Canada was grappling with a new generation of veterans. We had, prior to that, all known of the great veterans of the Second World War, of the Korean War, and of peacekeeping and other missions throughout the latter half of the 20th century. But for the first time in a very long time, we were dealing with the new challenges of young men and women who had served on the battlefield in an extremely dangerous and violent place, southern Afghanistan, and who were coming home with new problems with which we were not yet equipped to deal. His role was to transform and modernize programs so that they could serve those veterans who had suffered so greatly and whose needs were so grand. And I remember the time when he was minister and he would be on the road up until late at night, sitting in a Legion Hall, hearing the concerns and sometimes even the complaints of military veterans who were feeling strangled by a bureaucratic program, or that they weren't getting a prompt response to their concern, and to deal with others who were there to say thank you for the excellent service that he had managed to turn around in his, at that time, very short time as Veterans Affairs Minister. I remember the stories of him being up late at night on those famous Facebook chat groups, which he described as the virtual Legion Hall, where he would sit there in front of his computer until 1 or 2 in the morning, and veterans who were up late as well could ping questions and comments, complaints, suggestions off him, and he would respond personally, not through staff, personally, and in real time, sitting, I imagine, in his family living room in darkness, but for that screen glowing on his face. In these moments, we saw a true public servant. He would go on to run 2 very impressive leadership campaigns, one of them successful, where he became leader of His Majesty, Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition and the Conservative Party of Canada, and ran a spirited election campaign in very difficult circumstances, constrained by a pandemic that prevented the normal human interaction that typifies election campaigns. But he came through it and has been, he remains a statesman in our party. He has served loyally the people in his community, the people of Canada. And we know that wherever he goes, whatever chapter he decides to write in his life, one thing is for sure, that it will be consistent with the life of service that has personified everything he has done to date. And I look forward to...
Well, as everyone kind of knows, Erin O'Toole was the leader of the Conservatives and had extreme pressure against him and foreign interference, according to CSIS. This isn't from like newspapers. CSIS said it. And looks like this is his last speech in the House of Commons. Leave your comments below. It's kind of somber, kind of think about it. And a look back at what he did. Enjoy. Well, first of all, as you can see, everyone seems to know. Look, as you know, they're going up to MP O'Toole and they were giving him like a handshake and this and that. Do you think it was the foreign interference that made him decide, hey, you know, I don't want people around me to be a part of this, or is it that he's not the party leader and he doesn't have much of a place in this party? Like MP Scheer seems to be up there all the time, but Erin O'Toole, remember, he removed Pierre from finance, so maybe there's some rivalry, and then the interference was just enough. Okay, here it is. His full speech. Leave your comments below. Like, subscribe. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. Today, I rise for the last time in this chamber. It's been the honor of a lifetime for me to serve Durham in Parliament. My hometowns of Bowmanville and Port Perry, Oshawa, and dozens of small towns and hamlets. But these are just names on signposts. The real honor has been working with and learning from Durham's people, the volunteers, the young people, the civic leaders, the business leaders, Indigenous leaders, first responders. It's been a joy to work with them. But I want to start my remarks by thanking my incredibly supportive and patient wife, Rebecca. You are my true partner in all things, my rock, and my biggest supporter. We dedicated our family to public service, and I think we made a real difference. Thank you. I love you. I'm also incredibly proud of our two children, and I will retain special memories of my time with them. Running in Stanley Park with Molly, fishing for crabs on Vancouver Island with Jack. Thank you for serving Canada, and I love you too. They are here today with my parents and one of my siblings, and I want to thank all of my family for your love and support. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my political family, my friends and family here in the Conservative caucus, my best friends from the military, from law, from the corporate world. You were with me throughout this journey. How many first-time candidates can say they had Wayne Gretzky show up at their first fundraiser? How many candidates have little platoons of veterans knocking on doors with them every election? My success is due to you. You know who you are. Thank you very much. And a special thanks to my incredibly dedicated staff. The number of people who've worked with me over the years in Durham, your compassion has helped hundreds of families in our community. And to the incredibly bright women and men who came to work with me in Ottawa, in my office as Minister of Veterans Affairs and leader of the official opposition. Often you left good jobs in the private sector or elsewhere to take a chance and face immense challenge. You did this because you believed in me and you believed in this country. Thank you, and I will never forget your efforts. I'm also incredibly proud of the accomplishments we made together, both in government and in opposition. The last full sitting day of 2012 is when I first entered this chamber. Actually, it wasn't this chamber, it's the real one up the way, Mr. Speaker. But I had the pleasure, the honor of being escorted in as a by-election winner by Prime Minister Stephen Harper and by the late Jim Flaherty. Jim Flaherty was a political mentor to me, a colleague of my father's from Queen's Park, and to have my family in the audience that day taking my seat for the first time is a memory I will never forget. And a few months later, I had the honor to then work with my friend, the honourable member from Abbotsford, as his Parliamentary Secretary for Trade at a time that Canada had its most ambitious trade agenda in history, helping to finalize our free trade agreement with the European Union, traveling to Seoul, South Korea, to help drive home a final deal for our first free trade agreement in Asia. And while in Seoul, taking the time to lay a wreath for the hundreds of Canadians who died helping that great country earn its freedom. Working with our friends, the United States of America and other countries in the Americas. What an exciting time for a brand new MP. And I will never forget the day that I was sworn into cabinet. The memory of Molly explaining to her 3-year-old brother Jack that we were going to Rideau Hall, and Rideau Hall was kind of like the home of the Queen's friend in Canada. And then an hour later to see Jack, knowing it was the Queen's friend, but still standing on the couch in his shoes. That's a memory Rebecca and I will always keep. But what an honor for a Canadian Armed Forces veteran to be able to expand mental health treatments for our veterans, to reduce wait times, to start to win trust back from a generation of Afghanistan war veterans that were already feeling forgotten. Mr. Speaker, I traveled to more legions than anyone in Canada in that time. And I can tell you, I was yelled at more legions than anyone in Canada at that time. But sometimes listening, tough talk, and humility are ways to start to earn back trust. By restoring the memory of World War I soldier and MP Sam Sharp, to expanding benefits for veterans and their families, to forging friendships with the Equitas veterans who had been suing our government. I gave it my best in the time we had, and I truly believe we made a real difference. And then, Mr. Speaker, getting the chance to serve as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, the party of confederation, the party of the Bill of Rights, of leading the global fight against apartheid, of calling out at an early time the aggression of Vladimir Putin. This was the zenith of my time in politics. And given the pandemic, polarization, and uncertain prospects at the time, I took that responsibility very, very seriously. And I do believe that we made a real difference.
I'm proud of my team and of our work for the country. Work on the economy, innovation, mental health, reconciliation, our values and our interests on the world stage. We proposed smart policies for our future. It was also an honor for me, an Anglophone MP from Ontario, to honor the Quebecois nation and to participate in debates that are important to Quebec, to its culture, its language, its identity. As a leader, I often said, we must preserve the existence of the only French-speaking nation in North America. There are 7 million Francophones in Quebec and across the country in an ocean of almost 400 million inhabitants of North America. We must recognize that this is something that is very special and we must protect it. This is a patriotic project. It's a truly Canadian project, Mr. Speaker.
And now I end my time in this chamber as it began, Mr. Speaker, as the Member of Parliament for Durham, as a husband, as a father, as someone who believes deeply in Canada. And this is why, in my final moments, in my last time in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, I want to share my thoughts with my fellow parliamentarians. Over a century ago, as war raged in Europe, Prime Minister Borden said this about a Canada coming together to meet the challenges of its age. Quote, "In the awful conditions which confront the world today, why should the political future of any individual or the political fortunes of any party stand for one moment across the path of a great national purpose?" Mr. Speaker, war is again touching Europe, and democracy is being strained in many parts of the world. With this in mind, all of us in this chamber must ask ourselves, what is our great national purpose at this critical moment in history? There will be an important counteroffensive from Ukraine in the war this spring, and Canadian soldiers have helped train our friends in the Ukrainian army. But just last week, we learned that Canadian soldiers in Latvia were forced to buy their own helmets. This news came mere weeks after learning that the Prime Minister had told other world leaders that Canada had no intention of paying its fair share in NATO. The country that in Borden's time secured victory at Vimy Ridge now has its soldiers buying its own kit. The country that helped draft the NATO Charter now is saying it's not willing to pay and support it. This chamber should always ensure that the men and women have the equipment they need to do the job we ask them to do, and that our country never wavers from its commitment to peace, security, and living up to our word. That should be our national purpose, Mr. Speaker. There are Indigenous youth in Canada who voted for the first time for people here in this chamber. Yet some of these Canadians have never been able to drink the water in their community. It's our job to ensure that every child has access to clean drinking water and a fair chance to succeed in life. That should be part of our national purpose. It takes a decade to get a pipeline built to Tidewater in this country, 2 decades to get a mine into operation. Canada has been slowing down at a time the world is asking us to speed up. Getting Canadian resources to global markets for both our economy and our environment should be our shared national purpose, Mr. Speaker. There are many challenges facing Canada at this time, but there are also incredible opportunities waiting to be seized. But that is not happening today. Instead of leading, instead of debating our national purpose in this chamber, too many of us are often chasing algorithms down a sinkhole of diversion and division. We are becoming elected officials who judge our self-worth by how many likes we get on social media, but now not how many lives we change in the real world. Performance politics is fueling polarization. Virtue signaling is replacing discussion. And far too often, Mr. Speaker, we're just using this chamber to generate clips, not to start national debates. Social media did not build this great country, but it is starting to tear its democracy down. If we're not careful, there will soon be a generation of young voters who have never even heard a point of view different from their own. I fear the ignorance of the views of others will slowly transform into a dislike of others. And we can see that starting to happen, Mr. Speaker. Canada is a frontier country. We were built on the strength of the fur trade, a country where going hunting with your grandfather or an elder is as quintessentially Canadian as the backyard hockey rink. But today, hunters are often demonized as a threat to society by politicians who know that this is not true. Whole rural swaths of our country are being held up as the problem only to secure a few political points in the suburbs. Mr. Speaker, we are a country that sent our citizens far from our shores several times to fight for liberty alongside other countries in multilateral efforts. Canadian diplomats, including a future Prime Minister, helped draft the agreements built on that sacrifice to give us decades of peace and security. NATO, the United Nations, the Commonwealth. But today, too often, we're allowing conspiracy theories about the UN or the World Economic Forum go unchallenged, or we attribute sinister motives to these organizations or people in a way that is simply not true or not fair. And if we do this more, we're allowing others to define the debate for us. We risk allowing others to set the course for this country because too many members on all sides of this chamber, from time to time, I've been guilty of it myself, Mr. Speaker, we're becoming followers of our followers when we should be leaders. One member from the other side of the House told me, Mr. Speaker, that they no longer speak to their brother because of the divisive nature of the vaccine debates in the last election. Canadian families are in some cases finding it difficult to talk to each other about important issues. If we ever want to change this and begin to have respectful and serious discussions again, Mr. Speaker, That change needs to start right here in Canada's House of Commons. Why should the political future of any single member of this chamber or the electoral success of any one party stand in the way of our unity, of the prosperity we want to give to our children? Preserving these things and rising to meet the unique challenges facing Canada and the world today needs to be our national purpose. As members of Parliament, we must always put the country first. We must lead and not just follow. We must strive to inspire and be careful not to incite. And we must debate with insightful reason, not just tweet out of frustration. Because if we don't, Mr. Speaker, decades in the future, Canadians will point to this Parliament as the time when our national decline began. But colleagues, I don't think that will happen. I'm an optimist, and I hope you all reflect on some of these things over the summer, because I believe that Canada's best days are actually ahead of us, Mr. Speaker. I believe in this great country and its people. And friends, I believe in each of you. It's been an honor to serve with you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
I want to thank my good friend from Durham, and I believe there's a few other comments to be had. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor to rise.